everyone, welcome to Change Now, welcome to this session. My name is Stacy Algrain, I'm the founder of Ponts ParisTech Media, and I will be your moderator for this session. So for the next 1 hour, we will be talking about a subject that really matters for today, alimentation and agriculture, food resilience. So we will be talking about all the elements and solutions to bring more resilience into our food system, from bringing down our carbon footprints to recycling massively nutrients. And to do so, we have the pleasure to welcome 4 amazing speakers. And the first one is going to be Chance Cutrano from the US, and he's going to be presenting us one of the programs that he is actually developing in the US, Fish in the Fields. Welcome, Chance. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So you're gonna have 15 minutes to talk about these programs and your adventure and all the things you are doing actually in your life to make food more resilient. So now the floor is yours. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here. And, you know, there have been so many conversations that have been had throughout this conference about the challenges that we're facing to become climate resilient, to become carbon neutral, and to create more just and more sustainable systems. And I think, you know, to be kicking off this discussion, I feel very honored. And I think one of the ways I plan to kick this off and talk about the work that I'm doing and the work that we're trying to do here in California as we confront myriad challenges from the climate crisis. I thought I would start by showing you all a video. And I think there's the opportunity to launch a video right now. So I just wanted to ask the tech team to launch that video.
Today, this field produces tons of nutritious rice, but it has the potential to do so much more. When these rice fields are flooded for the winter, magical things begin to happen.
So now we flood about 250,000 acres of rice fields in the wintertime. And this has become a major component of the Pacific flyway for not only ducks and geese and swan, but all of the myriad of other shorebirds that need a marine environment.
These flooded fields are teeming with microscopic life, too. The mixture of rice straw, water, and sunlight creates plankton blooms, producing 150 times the biomass found in rivers and streams. And now, we found the key to unlocking a whole new world of benefits. Inspired by the age-old practice of fish and rice co-cultivation, Fish in the Fields radically reimagines farming California's 500,000 acres of rice with one simple solution: growing fish in these plankton-rich flooded rice fields in the off-season. Fish in the Fields optimizes rice production systems, providing farmers with a second crop while mitigating climate change.
The benefits seem to be revealing themselves to us. This year, we found that by adding fish to flooded rice fields, we can reduce methane emissions by as much as 90%.
So you're talking about creating all this protein while having a carbon negative effect.
Finding a fit that works in a synergistic, a natural, and a sustainable way it's like a unicorn. That'd be what we call it, right? It's the idea of this thing that rarely exists, but when it does, is a beautiful, beautiful thing.
Together, with our diverse cast of nonprofit, business, and public sector partners, Fish in the Fields is working to create win-win solutions for people and the planet.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I love when technology works like that. And yeah, so I thought that would be a great way to initiate and introduce myself. I'm Chance Cutrano, Director of Programs with the Renewal Institute, which is located here in the San Francisco Bay Area. And you know, the speakers that you saw in that video are part of this incredible cast, and I needed to center them and put them up front because they're the folks that really make this all work. And very grateful for them, as well as the founder of Renewal Institute. Have to give him a shout out as well. my late mentor and friend, Huey Johnson, who actually won an award, the Sasakawa Prize from the United Nations Environmental Program, for founding the Trust for Public Land and working with Wangari Maathai to plant trees in Africa as well, and many other things that he had done here in California and beyond. So he is the reason why we come to this moment with Fish in the Fields. He was a duck hunter in the duck blinds in California that are located in rice country, in the rice paddy ecosystems. And he was looking out one spring morning and looking at all of that water as the ducks were flying overhead. And he was wondering, what else could we be doing with the rice fields here in California? And so he started to dig into the research and realized that, we've tried it in the past here in the United States. Under the New Deal, there was an attempt to implement a program like this. And it's really honoring all of those globally important agricultural heritage systems that have been around for thousands of years in Southeast Asia and elsewhere, where they have integrated a lot of agricultural and ecological systems to create the most efficient and most resilient systems that are still in operation today, that are still working today. And so we're trying to, we decided to try to implement some of those things, to put those into effect here in California, first with salmon, trying to reintroduce salmon into rice fields for a project that's called the Nigiri Project. And that's still operational, a salmon restoration program, putting salmon into rice fields as they fatten up and get prepared to go into riverine ecosystems and head out to the ocean. And then we thought, what if we could scale that up a bit? There's some places where endangered species, where it's not the appropriate habitat, where there's not great connectivity, and maybe there's a commercial aspect to Fish in the Fields as well. And that is literally how the Fish in the Fields was born. And I'll just begin here also by acknowledging that, California is a large agricultural state and an economy of its own, here in the United States and globally. And at the same time, we know through other talks this conference that agricultural expansion, though biodiversity underpins our food systems in California and beyond, this agricultural expansion and industrial expansion we've seen in California and across the globe has had detrimental impacts to habitat, detrimental impacts to the viability of sustaining biodiversity. And we've seen 85% of wetlands lost. We've seen altered land surface up to 75%. And we've seen impacted ocean areas that have been impacted as well, up to 66% of our ocean areas. And so we're coming to this moment and trying to figure out how do we, in this decade of biodiversity restoration, as we approach 30 by 30 goals, conserving 30% of our land and waters here in the United States and beyond by 2030, in hopes of conserving maybe 50 by 50 by 2050, 50% by 2050. And so that's the moment we're coming to. And let's see if I can click my slide forward. Excellent. So here's the first example of that really is, I mentioned 85% of wetlands being lost globally due to reclamation, agricultural land use change, and other land use change. The wetlands have long been looked at as sort of this, wasteland that could be reclaimed and used and paved over and ditched and diked and dammed. And, in California, it's no different. California has lost 95% of its wetland ecosystems, more than any other state in the United States. And it has had detrimental impacts for everything from water recycling and groundwater recharge to actual habitat loss and fragmentation. And that you can see that on the left-hand side, we're looking at the former wetland ecosystems, all these blue and green areas, and on the right-hand side, we're seeing. Let me see if I can click here. We're seeing all that brown is agricultural land, and that's all reclaimed land that used to be wetland habitat for migratory birds and waterfowl and native fish and tule elk and all sorts of other incredible species whose numbers have dwindled in California. And that box right there is where this story begins for Fish in the Fields as an example of what we can do to reimagine how we live on the landscape here in California and how we might be able to tease out some tools for other places in the United States and globally. So that box is zoomed in right here. This is rice production country here in California. California is the second largest rice producer in the United States, second to Arkansas. And we typically produce around 500,000 acres of rice. It's one of the highest grossing or most productive rice land in the world. And we actually think there's a sort of saying that, every piece of sushi in the United States has some California rice in it. So it's surprising. We think of rice, we think of Asia, but yet we're also producing so much rice here in the United States. And let's begin here by also digging into the challenges that we're facing and for rice production, but otherwise as well. I'm sure some of you all have seen the news around the drought that we're in the middle of. And we are heading into an uncertain future here in California. Our former governor called it the new abnormal, Governor Jerry Brown. And by the century's end, we're expecting our daily temperature to increase by as much as 8.8% on average. And we're also expected to see a radical decrease in annual snowpack that provides water to 23 million Californians. Some of that, 64% reduction by 2100. And that's all while putting constraints on the state's $50 billion agricultural industry. We expect to see with these changes to water and the climate itself, reductions of 2 to 11% in crop yields by 2100. And the other thing that we're well aware of is, in addition to the overall productivity of landscapes and the yields, if we don't change anything, we're also thinking about the actual nutritional content of the crops that are being produced as well. I pulled this graphic just recently from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration here in the United States, but we are in the middle of a severe drought, especially in Northern California. And it's going to get worse. Our models are expecting that we move from this severe drought to an exceptional drought, where much of Northern California specifically is going to be hard hit with lack of water. We're already having many issues with water, and right now we're limited here in where I live, just north of the San Francisco Bay Area and north of the Golden Gate Bridge, but even rice producers are significantly hit, and other agricultural users are significantly hit. So that is where Fish in the Fields comes in. That is where these new models come in. And I'll say, Fish in the Fields is it's a nonprofit project that aims to expand with our partners to be a social benefit corporation eventually, and we're committed to raising fish in California's flooded rice fields when they sit idle in the off season. And it's a product, it's a winter crop that creates year-round productivity and additional income for rice farmers. It's a process requiring no additional land, water, or feed, while leveraging ecological principles to actually fight climate change. And it's a promise. It's a commitment to creating a landscape that works better for people and the environment. And so here's how it works. So in the springtime in California, rice fields are flooded and prepared for a 120-day growing season. And after that, come September and October, the fields are drained and the rice is harvested. And then, this is where the magic happens, the fields are reflooded to decompose the remaining rice straw. And provide waterfowl habitat as well, as you saw in the video, for migratory waterfowl and shorebirds. And that is when we plant our fish. So we plant fish in winter flooded fields. They're former ecosystems, they're former floodplain ecosystems. And there they naturally dine on the abundant plankton that are created from these plankton blooms with all of the decomposing rice straw. And they do that until March, when the fish are harvested and the cycle can repeat. And the fields are prepped and made ready for rice production all over again, with very minimal to almost no alterations to the rice fields. So with this one simple change that we've been working on, we're able to unlock year-round productivity from these fields for people and for the planet, and for the prosperity and productivity of the farmers that have this land. So let me go here to say that
Chance,
there are three.
Maybe I have to cut you now, because I see that you still have some slide to show, but we have already gone too far in terms of time. So do you have something final to say on the fish and fields, or maybe some conclusion words?
Yes, yeah, for sure. So I will say that, you know, the big three things about this project that we're excited to share about are that there are three things. One, methane reduction. We found that when we place fish in these fields, leveraging the ecological principles found by Dr. Sean Devlin, we're actually able to reduce methane emissions from rice fields in the winter months by affecting a trophic cascade, whereby the fish would eat the zooplankton in these fields, and the zooplankton would then free up methane oxidizing bacteria in this water column. So we're able to reduce methane emissions in our research so far by up to 65%, could be as high as 90%. And at the same time, we're able to produce this protein and create this new product, this climate-friendly rice, and at the same time supply habitat for waterfowl. And so I think that is the big piece of this, is to just acknowledge that we don't know so much about these systems that we're working in, and we know we need to create more resilient systems. And you know, that's the challenge that we face, but we need to stay curious, and we need to plan for ecological transitions. And and it's going to take all of us to do it. And so it's this multi-sector stakeholder group with the farmers, with nonprofit groups, with academics, and with business and government that we're actually able to achieve what we want to accomplish here for the next decade and for the next century to become more resilient. So really excited about the research, and please reach out, rri.org, if you have any more questions or you want to learn more about the project. But I just thank you so much for inviting me here to share this with you all, and I look forward to collaborating with you all in the future.
Thank you so much, Chance, for joining us today. I really appreciate that you are doing so much work on the ground with your colleagues, of course. And I hope you can come to France to share more with us, because I think we will greatly benefit from your research. So thank you so much again. And I hope you can pursue your work on the ground. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yes, I look forward to sharing some updates in the future.
Thank you. So now we will have to move on to the second part of our session. It is actually a panel with two amazing, inspiring speakers. The first one being Quentin Sannié, the founder and president of Greenback, the first global soil health global rating agency, and the second one being Benoît Le Baupe, an organic farmer here in France, and he is doing great work, and he will be talking about it just right now. So thank you so much for joining us. Welcome.
Thank you.
Maybe, Benoît, could you talk a little bit about what you are doing in your farm, and maybe why it is actually so important to change the practices and the way we are cultivating food today?
Yes, please. Yeah. If we look at how plants grow in nature, when a plant starts to grow, the plant will create soil, and the soil is composed of carbon, and the plant, with the energy of the sun, catch CO2 in the atmosphere and bring it into the soil. And that's how soil are created by plant. And the plant and the photosynthesis is the base of all energy on Earth. And so when plants grow in nature, they create soil, they store carbon in the soil, and this is the primary source of all energy for all living beings on Earth. But when humans start to make plants, to grow plants, that's what we call agriculture. And if we look of what agriculture has done since we start, like 10,000 years ago, it's like we destroyed billions of hectares of land by the fact of growing plants, because we did things wrong. For example, like agriculture has destroyed soil, and like half to two-thirds of the carbon that were in the topsoil went to the atmosphere because we till the soil. This is the principal problem of our agriculture globally. When we do agriculture, we destroy soil, and the CO2 go back into the atmosphere, and we need fossil fuel to maintain the system produces. And what we did wrong is, like, in natural systems, there is no tillage. The soil is like a living being, and if you plod him, it's like a massive tool of destruction. So this is really bad for soil, and this go to process like erosion with water and air, which makes decrease on fertility on land, and also the fact of to till the soil will make oxygen go into the soil and oxidate the organic matter, and that's will have for action to release CO2 in the atmosphere. So we have to really stop working soil with tools. And the other thing is like we need to put plants everywhere in the planet, tree, cover crops everywhere all the time, because this is the only way to get the energy from the sun and to bring it into ecosystem to create biodiversity, to create soil and to sequestrate carbon in our soil. So I think this is really important to understand that a plant can create stability and create soil, or a plant, if we cultivate it in a wrong way, it can destroy everything. So cultivate to living soil mean like
maybe
try
to go back to what you were saying. So that's the main reason why you're calling your set of practices farming on living soil, because you are trying to stop destroying the living beings present in the soil. And how did you discover that we can do that? Because not many farmers are choosing this path today. So how did you go through?
It depends. If you look at agronomy's books, it's the way of thinking is we want to make plants grow. So we look at what are the need for the plant, and we'll bring what the plant needs. So in terms of mineral like NPK, but I haven't done studies of agronomy, so I was like more interested in like biology and how system works, and it's all written, and there is like example of people who have done that like 15 years ago, maybe more, but I have no source on it. But it's just like to do the same way as nature do, and I have invented nothing. It's just like to copy the nature.
And regarding your work, Quentin, you are actually developing Greenback. Could you tell us what it is about and how did you come up with this idea?
I have been very upset and sad for years that too often agriculture has such a terrible impact on the environment. And as an entrepreneur, I was searching for a simple solution and a universal solution to help and change agriculture now. So 2 years ago and a half, I gathered a group of farmers in Normandy, where I'm living, to work on what is the problem with agriculture. Why are we in this situation? And very rapidly, the soil issue came up, and in fact, for more than 50 years, we have considered the soil as a simple substrate for the plants, thinking that we could protect and feed the plant with chemical inputs. And that's the root problem of the situation where we are now. And we are facing the consequences of this approach. In fact, the FAO, the UN Agency for Food and Agriculture, is considering that more than 50% of our agricultural soils are degraded or very degraded. So at Greenback, the problem of this is there is no tool to inform the
content.
Sorry?
Yeah, we didn't get what you were
Yes?
saying. Could you repeat maybe from like 1 minute ago?
Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yes. I was saying that we are facing the consequences of the massive use of chemical product instead of considering the health and the natural capacity of the soil, as you were just saying just before me. And so we thought that it could be really useful for agriculture to get information about the impact of the agricultural practices on the soil. So we are we are creating the first soil rating agency. That is, our goal is to measure the impact of agricultural practices on the soil. So, and in the soil, you have an environment impact of the practices. So we are measuring the carbon in the soil. So we are using techniques coming from the oil industry. That's funny. We are measuring the biodiversity through DNA approach, and we are measuring the pollution, the safety of the soil, and doing this with a global system of reference to be able to compare any kind of soil. We are able to rate the different kind of soil and on a universal scale. That's the goal. So we started 2 years ago our first pilot project, and we are close to launch our first commercial activity in a few weeks.
Maybe, Benoît, as we are now talking about measuring the impact of new practices and better practices, could you tell us about what you have been able to observe on your own farm and maybe the impact of your farming practices?
When I started, like 12 years ago, we start to measure how much carbon we have in the soil, and we have like analysis of 1.4% of organic matter in our soil. And now last year we did again some analysis, and we get like 8.8% of organic matter. And what that means, at the with 1.4%, like plants, it's really difficult to grow plants with really, when there is few carbon in the soil, and the structure is not good, the capacity of water water storing is really low, and it's difficult for plants to grow in that condition. So the idea, it's when there is no fertility, you have to bring fertility to grow the plant. But with practice like collecting and bringing back on the land like raw material, raw organic matter that will give food for bacteria and little organism, and that will create a living soil, and that living soil will create like a perfect soil for any plant to grow. So now, since the beginning, we had like really poor land, and now they are really fertile and much more resilient to extreme climatic events like dry, and that's one point about like fertility of the land, but also the fact to have increased the level of organic matter in that soil to 1% to more than 8. That means that if we do the count, in 4 hectares, we store more than 2,000 equivalent of ton of CO2. It's really huge. It's mean like in 4 hectares, we store in the topsoil the equivalent of the average consumption of French person for 170 years. So there is a real potential for soil to store carbon, even though some study shows that it's not the solution, or it's not all the solution. What I see from my field, or what the study of and the publication of Pascal Boivin have shown, that it's really possible, and this is probably the biggest opportunity for humanity to sequester some greenhouse with agriculture.
So I think with you, Benoît, we are seeing why it is actually important to being able to measure what's going on in the soil and to really see the impact of what you are doing on your farm. So if that's why you actually told me, Quentin, that your dream is to be able to link all the time the practices to their consequences and their results?
Absolutely, and what Benoît is doing, it's very interesting, because there is such a lack of information, a lack of knowledge between the practices and the impact on the environment. Not only for the farmers, but for the whole chain in the food industry. Most of them, often the actors are blind, in fact, on their impact on soil health. So even the soil health is something that is completely new, or agriculture is hyper-regulated in terms of practices. The regulators tell you what to do, how to do, but there is no regulation on the impact. And it is what is important. The goal should not be to say what is allowed, what is forbidden, but to say what should be the impact of agriculture. And Benoît was talking about for example, about the carbon in the soil. It's a main aspect. So no one was really interested until now to measure what's happening in the soil. So our goal is to provide the farmers, the food industry, any actors involved in the value chain with a tool, with a solution to measure the impact of the practices. And our goal is to create a widespread preference for healthy soil. So as the farmer, I prefer working on healthy soil with natural fertility and resilience, especially with the climate problem we are facing now. As an industry guy, as a food brand, I prefer products coming from healthy soil with a well-known origin. As a finance guy, I prefer to finance sustainable biosourced activities and farmers that respect the soil and the environment. So I guess that our tool will accelerate the knowledge between the practices and the health of the environment. It's what we want to bring in a big way to agriculture. So I think this kind of tool are able to drain more funds to agriculture, to help to pay more the farmers for best respected soil, from product coming from best respected soil, and to remunerate farmer for their environmental impact. So what Benoît is doing is bringing a lot for the climate. So we can help him to do this, and it's really useful for the community. And we can also finance and help and insure the most fragile farmers who are embarking to do this. We need tools, and it is what we are bringing in the field. Sorry?
No, we lost you for like a few seconds, but it's fine now. Maybe I would have one last question for you, Benoît. So as Quentin said, what you are doing is really important for our soil and for the resilience of our food systems. But do you think it could be possible to upscale it to bigger farms and to really use the same practices in bigger farms like we have all around the world today?
Yes, I'm sure, because there is forest everywhere around the world. It's just like we have to change the way we see how to grow plant and to put like the carbon management in the center of all our practice, because carbon is a support of life and of a healthy soil. And if you want to have healthy plant, you need to have healthy soil. So and many examples show that is possible everywhere around the planet, and at every scale. It's just we will change the tool, and for me, it's not anymore like a technical issues as we always think it is. I think there is people around the world who know how to do that kind of agriculture. The only problem now it's like a social issue, a political issue, but not anymore a technical issue. So I think we could go further, and we need to change now our practice.
Maybe on the same question, Quentin, do you think we have to see bigger now and to really try to expand this kind of propositions and solutions? And what about maybe the solution proposed by Greenback?
Yes, I do agree with Benoît. I think our society will no longer accept that we are not taking into account the environment impacts of our decision. So we will not accept more generalized greenwashing discourse around pseudo-environmental promises. So it's no longer enough to say that, for example, the product is organic, or the origin is not enough to guarantee a product. So the people want proofs about the impact. So the consumers, the citizen, of course, but not only. What is interesting, what is changing profoundly now is even the investors are very interested to understand the impact on the environment of their decision when they are investing, and they are going to take into account more and more the environmental impact and the reputation of their investment. So it's a good news, because the environmental issues are expanding their scope of influence, and the thing I'm seeing, the way it's changing is we are quitting the pure virtue to enter the field of reason. So the impact on the environment is now not only a passion for a few people, but the reason for most of the people, and even the more greedy, I guess. So I want to be optimistic for the future.
Thank you so much to both of you for coming today and sharing your knowledge with us, because that's really what we should all do, sharing that knowledge with all the people in this world to make people aware that there are actually solutions and that we can change now, because that's the theme of this congregation today, and that's why we are today with us. And so thank you so much for coming and joining, and we will make sure to follow your work on social media. And now we will have to move on to the last part of this session, which is actually a fireside chat with Fabien Esculier. Fabien, welcome. So you are the founder and coordinator of Okapi Research and Action Program team. So you also work at the Ecole des Ponts ParisTech. and you are working on a really amazing project, but kind of uncommon. So can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yes, what we are working on is how can we consider elsewise human excreta. Human excreta, it's pee and poo, urine and feces. And in our society, it's something that people usually don't even think about or have disgust towards it. And what we want to do is that we want to show that 100 years ago in France, in Europe, in the Western world in general, urine and fecal matter were very precious, and there was a lot of business about using them as fertilizers. And this debate has totally disappeared in the Western world, nearly totally disappeared. So we are working on how can we imagine looking differently at our urine and feces in order to valorize it, and especially with urine that has a lot of nutrients that can be used as fertilizers.
So maybe the question that the people who are following this session are going to be asking themselves is, what do we do with all these excretions? Why do we need them actually?
So today, how it works is when a human being eats, a human being needs to eat nutrients. And let's talk about the main nutrient, that is nitrogen. So we need to eat about 4 kilograms of nitrogen every year. It's contained in the proteins. And then we don't store it, because at the end of the year, I will weigh the same mass at the beginning of the year. So I don't store, I have to excrete somewhere. And we found these 4 kilograms of nitrogen also in our excreta. So you have 4 kilograms in entrance and 4 kilograms in the exit. The difference is that you have proteins in the entrance, and you release nitrogen in the form of urea in the urine. It's not the same molecule, but it's the same nitrogen. And so basically, a plant works the opposite. They eat urea and they make protein. So you have the possibility of a total circular way of managing nitrogen, because we have a metabolism that is the exact opposite of the one of the plants. So that's how it could theoretically work and how it works in certain conditions. And how does it work now in our society is the big problem. When I say our society, I mean the Western world and more all industrializing countries. So it's starting to be quite general in the whole world. How does it work? We produce nitrogen in factories, and it costs a lot of energy, and it's mostly fossil fuels. It's about 1% to 2% of all world energy and all world greenhouse gas emissions that go for producing nitrogen. And then when we excrete it, you have countries where you just excrete in the water and then put the water in the rivers, so you pollute the rivers. And you have countries, well, in the Western world, where you will treat this because you don't want the pollution in the river, so you build a treatment plant. But the thing is, it's so diluted that we didn't find any way else to treat it than to destroy it. So you have two plants, one that builds the nitrogen and costs a lot of energy and greenhouse gas emissions, and another plant that destroys it. Whereas you have the possibility of using it as a fertilizer.
So basically what you are saying is that in today's world, where we know that energy at some point is going to be missing because we're going to need it, we are losing all this energy to delete something, to really cancel it and to destroy it, while we can actually use it to make our food system more resilient.
Exactly. The fact that fossil fuel has been considered as unlimited a few decades ago or a century ago has led to a world where we have produced a lot. And if you look at the case of Paris, for example, Paris was recycling urine of the people in Paris in the beginning of the 20th century. And what happened is that there was so many artificial fertilizers from fossil fuel on the market that they started to be cheaper, and people started saying, okay, why should we bother recycling urine? Because we have free, unlimited fertilizers. Now we understand that there's a huge impact in the production and the use of these fertilizers, so we can come back to the idea that was already implemented 100 years ago, that is, we can recycle this resource. But of course, it's not simple, but the main idea is this.
Maybe what's also surprising is that nobody is really talking about it, because at the point where I was starting to talk with you, I learned that that can be a solution, but I never heard of it actually in the news or anywhere actually.
Yeah, knowledge about it is very different in the parts of the world. I would say in the Western world, things have been forgotten in the cities maybe 100 years ago or 50 years ago. But you have places in the world where people use their urine as a fertilizer and know very well about it. And even in France, there is a lot of people who know about it, and I would say there is a real tendency of people growing interest in the topic. We studied especially Europe, and in Europe, things we could say started in Sweden in the 1990s. I would say restarted, because it was the case already 100 years ago, in the 1990s, and there's been a lot of eco-districts that were built by people who said, okay, if our urine can be a fertilizer, why should we pollute our lakes and rivers? We can use it as a fertilizer. And I visited in Sweden places where for already 25 years, the people are storing their urine and using it on the land that is right next to their place to fertilize and then eat the production from it. So from Sweden, the interest has been growing, and discussions about it have grown in many different countries. So there's a true movement of reinterest. But if you didn't know about it, it means most probably that it's still not so widespread.
And another question would be, does it have to be a collective choice, or can it be from individual? Like, if I go to my home and I want to use my expressions and everything, can I do it?
Yeah, so in France in particular, there's a lot of use of urine and feces in rural areas where people have a better control of how they can organize themselves. And in our research, we are working mainly on the question of how is it possible to implement collective management of urine and or feces that would be separated at source and manage to produce fertilizer. And so, of course, in the city, you have less possibilities of using it easily. What we are working on mostly is all fringes of the city where things are possible. And there are lots of fringes where it already happens. For example, festivals or events like this one. Since I would say about 20 years in France, there's been more and more dry toilets on events. You have people that have some small gardens in the city, shared gardens, where you can also implement this, and so on.
And is there any sanitary concerns with using that? Because with medicines and all the things you can find.
The main reason, well, one of the reasons why urine and fecal matter have been disregarded is a question of sanitary aspects. But the question is interesting, because urine and fecal matter have two main aspects concerning sanitary questions, because feces can convey many diseases, whereas urine it's very rare that you could find that the risk with the use of urine is very low. So as soon as you mix urine and fecal matter, you have a bigger risk of health than with separate management. So we see a lot of places where people have a different management, so they can have a specific question about the use of feces. For example, you have toilets where you flush the feces with water, because people don't want a management of feces that would be dry for the health reason, but urine is collected separately and used. So that's one of the schemes that maybe is fit for dense areas.
And regarding the water that is actually being used for flushing the toilets and everything, can it help reduce that if we try another management?
Of course, the main environmental gains with source separation, it's the less water that would be consumed, of course, but then this depends a lot on the places. I mean, there are places where you have no water, or very, very little water. In these places, to flush your urine to the river is, for me, completely crazy. I mean, you have an explanation why does it happen, but when you look at it, you could really question it very hard. And in places where you have more water, the topic of the problem of the volumes of water consumed is not so huge. So it really depends on the place where you are. Something that doesn't really depend on the place is energy and greenhouse gas emissions. And in our last, in the thesis of Tristan Martin that was defended in December, he did a life cycle analysis of conventional fertilizers and conventional wastewater treatment versus transformation of urine converted into fertilizer. And he showed that we divided by 4 the greenhouse gas emissions in the other paradigm. So the interest is huge in terms of greenhouse gas emissions reduction.
And regarding our food systems, like how can we really try to make the best of these excretions? Like how do we take them from the cities, for instance, and bring it to the farmers?
Our main point is that the whole agro-food system needs to be think again. I mean, I believe there's been a lot talked about in ChangeNOW about this topic. And for me, there's 3 pillars that need to be changed. The first, change in the industrialized country. The first pillar is the way we produce the food. The second is the diet. And the third that is really often not thought about is how do we manage urine and fecal matter, because it's the same materials that flow in all this. So what we are doing at the moment is we are producing documents for the farmers in order to help and see in which form can we transform our urine and or fecal matter to produce fertilizer, and for which kind of production does it fit, and how can you transform the way we fertilize if we use this. And in one of our papers done by some colleagues and will be published very soon, we propose for Europe in all that we don't need any nitrogen fertilizer, chemical fertilizers, if we swap to organic agriculture. I mean, not necessarily labelized, but the principle of organic agriculture with legumes cultivation, and if you return the human nitrogen on the soil. And this enables to have a totally autonomous nitrogen fertilization for the whole of Europe.
And that's actually free because excretions are going to be there anyway. So maybe there are going to be problems with the agro-industry and people who are actually making money with these fertilizers in Europe.
It's always a question of power and who controls what and so on. So this subject is really a question of tension that you can see also through the history. I mean, before we had the wastewater system with the sewers and the flush toilet, the people who were managing the urine and fecal matter were very powerful, and they resisted for decades to the transformation to sewers with the flush system. So today, most probably, what we will see is that you have actors that have their business model, and source separating urine is not in the classical business model. So of course, all the people who are not doing it will resist to the fact that it could pose a problem to their business model. But then you have other actors who on the opposite say, okay, I can evolve, or there can be new actors coming in. So it's always like this in transitions. You have a question of different actors who take the topic and react differently. So at the moment, yes, there are people who probably are opposed to it for this question, but there are also an enormous amount of actors who are willing to go into that kind of transformations.
And do you think in the future we could see some companies, startups, and all these kind of actors taking the human excretions to make fertilizers and making a business out of these excretions?
Yeah, in China, in the 20th century, it was called Jinzhehong. It means the business of the golden juice. It was a true business, and there were companies dealing with it. And China stopped after the 1980s when they started to do the Western-style industrialization of China. In France, if you look at the city of Lille, for example, you had an enormous amount of companies that were transporting urine and fecal matter on the waterways to Belgium and exporting. Paris was exporting to London these fertilizers. So, of course, this business is totally possible, and there are already also in France and in other countries associations or companies or cities that are managing it. And maybe I could highlight the fact that today the management of urine in a city is a public question and is managed by the city. And for example, in the city of Paris, where there are projects of collecting urine. The city itself is also thinking about managing it. So it's also a public question that could, in some options, stay a public management to deal with it.
So in order to do that, you have to talk to the people who are leading this country, governments, states, and all these kind of actors. How do you, I don't know, how do you make them trust you and really understand that this is a good solution?
For me, the main point is we need to share the problem. I defended a thesis in 2018, and in my thesis, I show that I call it the nutrition excretion system. So the food production, diet, and management of urine and fecal matter. I show that this system is not sustainable. So the question is not, should we, you have to separate urine. That's not the question. The question is, how do we make a transition towards a sustainable system? And we demonstrate the sustainability, for example, in terms of greenhouse gas emission of urine source separation. So for me, the most important thing is not to bring a solution and say we have to do this, is to bring the problem, discuss about it, have the debate. So that's the reason why I'm here, and I'm very happy to be here. How can we best deal with our urine and fecal matter? How can we think about this problem? And how is the way that we can solve it? And I'm sure that the question is very territorial. In each areas, you will have different ways of managing different solutions. And for me, the most important thing is that the local actors take the subject and deal with it. If you look at all the money that we are investing today to destroy urine and fecal matter, you have a tremendous amount of economies that you can make in terms of finance, in terms of greenhouse gas emission, in terms of energy, and so on. So for me, the most important thing is to apprehend the problem and then find together the best ways to make a transition.
So what we can envision now is to think globally about this situation and how we manage the excretions, but to really propose different way of doing it, because we can't really propose an European plan on managing these excretions. We have to, as you said, think locally and do maybe a per case solution.
Yes. If we look again, I'm sorry to talk more about the Western world, but our research is mainly based on France and Europe in general. But if you look at the Western world, where we have only one way to manage urine and fecal matter in the city, you flush it in the toilet, and then nobody knows what happens. So there is a huge diversity of way that you can manage elsewise. And so the main question is which way of managing is adapted to which situation. And also we have infrastructure that exists. We have the sewers, we have the wastewater. There's a lot of job that is done to protect the rivers today in these treatment plants. They can also evolve in order to recycle more. And the question is, how can we combine in the different parts of the cities management with source separation, maybe of urine and fecal matter, sometimes only urine, sometimes both, and there are dozens of different ways to managing. So the main question is just we need to know about them, consider them, and think about how to implement them. Maybe I could ask also one thing is, in the way that the city is built, we see today that it's very difficult to bring innovation, because many people, be it the city, the companies, will just bring schemes that exist already. Yeah. But if you look, for example, at the, how is it called, participatory urbanism, so the people who will think themselves about how they want to build a house. In this kind of places, you have a lot of people, if you ask them the question, how do you want to manage your urine and feces, and you tell them about the different options, you see many people who say, okay, I prefer to have a way in which they are recycled rather than putting them in the water. So it also questions the way that we build today, and because the people arrive in the house that has been thought by other people for them. But if you give the power again of the people to think of how they want to manage these things, I'm sure that there are new ways of managing that can emerge, but it changes enormously the way that things are happening today.
Okay, and I think that something you said that was really important, it's the way that when we flush it down the toilet, basically we don't see it and we don't think about it. And that was the same problem with the waste, that we are throwing it away. And as long as we don't see it, we don't really think about it. So maybe we should show excretions more in the media and everything, and show that that's actually something that could really matter to food resilience and to our society as a global component.
Exactly. Today I didn't come with some urine to show, but I show what you can produce with urine. So this is biscuits.
Okay.
I will be glad to share them with you afterwards. But so this is biscuits. We have used urine as a fertilizer on a field.
Okay.
We have grown wheat with this field. We have made flour with the wheat, and we use the flour to make biscuits. So for me, this is a very good way for the people to show what you can do if you use your urine. So I totally agree with you, and I will be very happy to share this with you afterwards.
Thank you so much.
So you can conceptualize what biscuits do you eat today, and what kind of biscuits could you eat tomorrow if things change? So it's a way to live in your body the debate about this question.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. And that will be the end of this session. Thank you so much for joining us and for bringing me cookies. I like it. So thank you so much, guys, for watching this session. I hope you'd like it, because I really did, actually. And so you can actually see the replay on the ChangeNOW website, and that will be all from me. Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you.